Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 PIBBSS Symposium. Our speaker, Tomasz Steifer, will be discussing chain of thought via reinforcement learning.
Thank you. So yes, that's more or less what I'm gonna talk about, or you could see it as a tale of many failures. Because okay, so because before I go to this, well, so you already heard my name. I guess some special thanks to Adam and Paul, who were like my official mentors, and also to Eric Alt from Simplex, and I also had some nice discussion with Franz, who was just speaking. And okay, so I kind of wasn't sure how exactly go with this talk because uh, so I ran a lot of experiments that mostly failed to achieve what I wanted, and I'm not gonna give you all the all the report of all the failures. I will try uh, to list a few points that were initially failures, and then somehow I managed to some obstacles that I managed uh, to surpass, and uh, and then maybe it will lead us to some next steps. So what's the research question? You know, I worked before on expressivity of transformers. So what kind of question we study in expressivity of transformers is, well, is some task, is it is there a transformer? So, you know, like a special choice of weights such that this transformer solves some task. And if we can show that such transformer exists or show that it cannot exist, we are very happy. But this is somehow there is some gap between this kind of expressivity results and whether we can train a model using, for instance, gradient descent method to solve some task. So something that generally interests me is to go through this from this expressivity theoretical results to empirical observation, where we see that okay, yeah, this thing that we some kind of theory suggests, these existential truths, they correspond to what we see in the practice. And this is where this research question come from. So can we train a small transformer? So generally there is this, okay, so generally there would be this serious, this type of research question. If we take some theoretical solution that some smart people came up and publish a paper about it, can we train a small transformer to learn this kind of solution? Or is it maybe there are some obstacles that make it hard for learning? And in particular, we can ask this question for models that use chain of thoughts. So this is the question: can we train a small transformer to solve some tasks using chain of thoughts, and in such a way that the model will discover or invent its own reasoning language? So how to reason? And if so, what would the model discover? And so I mean, when I say small transformer, it's like completely not pre-trained model. It's like complete tabula rasa. So these would be very simple languages. But somehow, if the model learns, there could be two possibilities. Either this theoretical solution that we have gets repeated in the model, so the model learns exactly what we would suppose, or maybe there is some kind of completely different alien reasoning that first we wouldn't think of, and then it might be like very resistant to our attempt to do mechanistic interpretability on that. So that was the research question, and pragmatically the goals that's of what I was trying to do. So okay, take a small transformer, train it using reinforcement learning. We will see in a moment why reinforcement learning is not like offline approach. So train it to solve a formal language recognition task using chain of thought. And because I want to see what kind of reasoning the model can discover, I don't want to assume any predefined structure for this reasoning. So I want to give the model only sports rewards about the final answer. So if the model generates some sequence of tokens that I will interpret as reasoning, I only want to give him the signal, okay, the final answer is correct or not. And maybe some additional tricks that make the training more stable, but no, as they call it, dense reward that would look at each action of the model and then give reward to each action based on, for instance, whether the reasoning steps are as we would expect them. And then the second part that mostly exists on this slide is if we manage to train the model, try to do some simple mechanistic interpretability to answer our initial question. So to see if what the model learn, how it corresponds to our theoretical solutions. Okay, so before I go to my experiments, let me show you a few slides with this theoretical background. So a language over a binary alphabet is just a set of binary words, and generally this kind of computer science problem is given a word, you get a word as an input, and you have to tell whether this word belongs to the language, to this set. So for instance, it can be very simple language of words consisting only of ones. It may be a language of if our alphabet is more complicated and consists not of 0, 1, but of parentheses, it can be this language consisting of correctly open, closed parentheses, like what Franz was talking about before me. And in the field of transformer expressivity, people try to understand which languages are easy and which are hard for transformers, which might be a different thing than easy and hard as known from general theory of computations for other models of computation. But what does it mean easy and hard? Well, we have these two distinct senses in which we can ask these questions. So this first, these two senses are connected to somehow two modes in which the computation in transformer can operate. And I don't mean encoder-decoder now, but something rather different. So one mode is this, what I would call one iteration. So we take a word, we give it, so the sequence of tokens, we give it as an input to the transformer. We run a single forward pass of the transformer and say we produce one single new token. And so what does it mean that the transformer solves some task in this sense? Well, we expect that the answer to the task sits in this new token. So for a case of formal language, we can ask, do we have a single transformer for that language that takes a word W, run a single forward pass, and then generates token yes if the word W is in the language, and no otherwise. So that's the first sense. And a lot of results were formulated in this sense. And there is this other sense that perhaps is more natural. If we think about transformers as a just very small model for what large language models do, or just like, baby language models. So again, we have a binary word, or a word over a bigger alphabet if you want. We give it as an input for the transformer, but now instead of running just a single pass, we are allowed to run several forward passes, generating a new token after each pass, and then feeding it back as part of an extended input. So we have an input, we get a new token, now we get the input and the new token back to the transformer, and we do it several times. And now the tokens that we generate, they don't have to contain the answer right away, but we expect that at some point this thing stops in some sense. For instance, we expect that after some number of steps, the last generated token contains the answer. And all these tokens that happen in between, they're just a tool for the model to write down its internal reasoning. They might not even make any sense to us. We are only interested in about this last token. And these intermediate tokens, I would say that they're either chain of thought tokens or reasoning tokens, or maybe even reasoning steps, depending on the context. So now, some tasks are hard to solve in one iteration, which means that there is no single transformer that would solve it for arbitrary inputs. And some tasks are easy if we allow reasoning with this chain of thought tokens. Again, easy here means that we can give a theoretical solution. We can say, okay, if you put the weights like that, then this will do what you want. But it doesn't mean that we can encounter this solution if you just initialize the model at random and then make updating via gradient descent or something like that. So it may be that learning this theoretical solution is still hard, even though they exist. Okay, and actually this is something that kind of happens in the case that I will be talking about, so parity. So parity is just a language consisting of all binary words that contain an even number of ones. Is parity hard or easy? Well, we have actually there is not a single easy answer, I guess, like a simple answer, but there are some answers. So, like one of the first papers that's kind of contributed this area of expressivity of transformer was Han's paper, where he showed that parity cannot be solved if we consider not normal transformers, but some kind of idealized model where instead of softmax, we have hard attention. What doesn't mean is that when one token has some attention to all the other tokens, we don't take a softmax of the values in these other tokens, but we just take the one that has the most attention and only take the value from this single one. This model is, I guess, much easier to analyze. That's why a lot of results are for these kind of results. Then at the same time, there are several papers, including one preprint with me as an author, which gave some constructions for transformer, where if we get to like a normal transformer with soft attention, with softmax, then you can give a construction of a model that computes parity. But then you have to assume some kind of unbounded positional encoding, and it might be still difficult to train such a thing in practice. And indeed, there were some reports that parity somehow, there is a general, I guess, empirical folklore that parity is hard. And even if you can fit fit a model to the training data, then it won't generalize and okay, but this was still all in the one iteration solving, and then if we can think, do we get anything if we allow reasoning tokens? And suddenly parity gets very, very simple. So what's an example of a solution? Okay, so first first thing we do, we copy the first bit, and then we just iteratively run excluded or as applied to the last chain of thought token and the next input token that we haven't considered yet. I mean, to see an example, we have this input 1001101, and then we write first odd and odd, 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 even, odd, odd, even. And the last even is the answer for the whole sequence. Actually, you can also observe that these things that appear on the way are parities of the prefixes, increasingly longer prefixes. Yeah, as it's written. And this kind of explains why I'm talking about this task, because it has this nice feature. So this procedure is recursive. So once we go to generating the second chain of thought token, we basically just do the same thing until we repeat it enough number of times. We only use two kind of tokens, so this somehow again should be easy to learn or easier than other tasks. And we can assume that number of reasoning steps is fixed. So this is again something we take some parts of the responsibility from the model. It doesn't have to decide when to stop. And I'm telling about this on purpose because initially I tried, I guess half of the summer I was trying to work with a different language. So actually with the parentheses matching what's something like what Franz was talking about. And then the situation is a little bit different because I guess if you think about the solution that would be natural, it's some kind of solution that's based on stacks. To simulate stacks with chain of thought, again, some kind of natural idea would be to do counting, but then to do counting, you might need a lot of different distinct tokens. And the model might also have to decide when to stop or when to continue. So since this wasn't working at all, I went to parity because it seemed like a much, much simpler case. And okay, so getting back for a moment to the theoretical backgrounds or generally to background, like what was done. Some people try to train small transformers to solve parity using chain of thought. And I know at least two papers where something like that happens. I mean, one is for not for full parity, but for some simple variant. But I guess it's relevant. And another does it for like full parity. I mean, full up to some length. And the crucial difference is that they don't do it with reinforcement learning. They do it in offline learning, and they assume what's the correct reasoning. So they just assume this algorithm with XOR that I gave you a few slides before, and they just give this kind of examples step by step how to reason. And then the models somehow learn to do that better or worse. And also, for instance, these authors, at least for some part of their experiments, they employ additional stuff like pre-training on a simple task, then only fine-tuning part of the model for parity. So that's also kind of imposing some structure because the simple task that they choose is chosen, specifically to be some integral some building block of their theoretical solution. So again, my motivation was to see like complete tabula rasa and not we don't assume nothing about how the model should reason and see like can we make it to reason. So that's why I have adapted the reinforcement learning approach. Well, because it seems like a natural framework for that, or at least for me as a person that knew almost nothing about reinforcement learning, it seemed as a natural uh, approach. And the only feedback that I want to be giving is once I generate some number of chain of thought tokens, whether the final answer is correct or wrong. So naively, how this training loop would look like. I initialize the model with random weights, well, like in every kind of training, I guess. Or yeah, and then I take a random input and put it to the model and run n of these forward passes, generating n chain of thought tokens. I check whether the last token is correct or not, and then give positive or negative rewards depending on that. And of course, what's happening there is a little bit more subtle than that, but like intuitively, we can think that depending on whether I give positive or negative reward, what I tell back to the model is like, try to do the same stuff next time, but the same stuff means the whole sequence of the chain of thought tokens that it generated, or try not to do that ever again on that input if the signal is negative. Some additional consideration is that we do curriculum learning, so we start with shorter inputs and then gradually increase to larger inputs only once we see that the performance is fine, which seems reasonable because, well, for shorter inputs, like there is less randomness in this, and I think this is pretty standard. And some additional consideration too that might be important, might be irrelevant, is that since we deal with different inputs, so I would like to do some batch processing so that it runs faster. But the problem is that I have different lengths, so I have to do some length padding. Path with the like blank token to the maximal length, and I do it, and then I put the end of the line token, and these tokens are masked so that the transformer, when it makes its forward pass, it completely ignores them. But there might be some shifting in positional encoding. What I mean is that, well, if I had the input sequence of length 3, then the first chain, without padding, then normally the first chain of token would be on the fourth or fifth position, depending on whether I had this end of line token. But with padded, it's a little bit different because it's now on 22nd position. This, in principle, I guess shouldn't matter, but in some cases it might. Okay, so what can go wrong with this naive approach that I gave you? I will try to mention a few obstacles that I have encountered. I guess it will be like three, maybe four obstacles. So the first obstacle is, we could call it spurious reasoning patterns. Okay, so let's think about this naive approach uh, that we have seen. So when we initialize the model at random, we can kind of expect that it's like a random guesser. So we just, with probability 1/2 outputs yes, and with probability 1/2 outputs no. That means that for parity, where we generating these inputs somehow in natural way, we get roughly half and half positively and negatively labeled examples. That means that this randomized model has a pretty high probability of giving a correct answer. At the same time, this answer is preceded by some sequence of tokens that we want to interpret as reasoning tokens. And the probability that the model generating them at random generates something that makes sense is much, much lower than just the probability of hitting the correct answer. So most of the time, if we see if this giving positive rewards happens, then almost like with almost probability 1, this happens for a wrong reason. So this training loop defined like that, I guess, cannot work because we are just reinforcing the model to do something that was completely random and that didn't contain any reasoning. So, but we have some weird problem because we would like to give the model a reward only if what's generated is somehow reasonable. So it's a good candidate for a reasoning sequence. Or at least like have a high probability that if if we give a positive reward, then we know that at least with high probability, that means that the reasoning was somewhat good. But the problem is that we are working with this assumption that we don't know what the correct reasoning is, and we want to be somehow very liberal about what can be a good reasoning sequence. So there is some kind of simple probabilistic fix. Instead of computing the reward based on performance on a group of inputs, instead of computing the reward based on a single input, take a group of inputs, run the model on each of them, and then see what was the performance on all of them on the group. This is like very, very simple and natural. If you have a random model, then uh, on the group it should roughly get half of the answers correctly. If you see that the model is highly non-random, that gives us some kind of hint that maybe it was using the correct reasoning pattern. At least assuming that we are in the case where the task is too hard to be done without chain of thought. Uh, okay, and now to implement it, I guess different approaches are possible. So we can just scale the rewards based on how far we are from 1/2. Maybe we can do something so we can scale linearly or non-linearly. I guess it probably makes more sense to do it non-linearly. But we can also, instead of scaling the rewards, we can play with the gradient descent itself. So if we see that the performance on the group is close to random, well, then maybe we don't want to change the model that much. So just do a very small learning step. But if we see that we are far from being random, then okay, we are safe, and we can try to do larger steps in the gradient descent. And in the end, my recent iterations of my code use some kind of combination of these. So there is some play with some gradient scaling, and some group updates that do something like GRPO, which is this algorithm from DeepSeek, but not exactly because basically GRPO is about something else. I mean, it's a approach that takes performance on a group, but this group comes from a single input. So we take one single input and we run a group of different randomized completions and then do something. So I'm doing this same thing, but the group is now on different inputs. And this seemed to somehow work to some extent, but I have no theoretical grounding for whether this makes sense, at least except some kind of very crude arithmetical grounding. Okay, the second obstacle that I have encountered is the entropy collapse. And this is actually something that's, again, it's not that I'm discovering something groundbreaking, because this is something that people working in RL know about, or at least people who work on RL and transformers. So what's this entropy collapse? Remember that we have this thing that, okay, we take a random sample, the model gives some actions, and then depending on what's in the end, we give reward. So somehow the model is trying to guess a correct reasoning sequence, and they try different reasoning sequences, and then depending on the reward, learns which were good and which were wrong. But to try different reasoning sequence, of course, we need some kind of random exploration, because if the model just always output the same stuff, then it cannot get any information about what's good and what's bad. But somehow in transformers, when we do reinforcement learning with them, we often see this thing called entropy collapse, which means that the model starts acting deterministically. So, like, if you think that the model just outputs some probability distribution on actions, we would like this probability to have like some kind of relatively large entropy for the exploration to be possible. But what can happen is that somehow this entropy goes to zero. So the model just always say, okay, let's do this. And this can happen even though the accuracy is far from perfect. And there are papers that study this. Uh, when I say study, I mean that they're trying to understand why this happens, but also what can be done uh, to avoid this. And it is also something that I observed. And before I found out that this is really something pretty common, it took me some time of looking into the accuracy, the plots of the laws, and trying to understand like what the hell. So how can you deal with this? There are some pre-made methods. So for instance, this paper that I'm mentioning here, they add some spectral normalization to the model. some other different kind of fixes that you can use. Well, so if you see that the entropy went down, but the accuracy is not very good and it continues to, and it stays not very good for a long time, then you can just reset some part of the model somehow, start the training from scratch or like part of the training. What I was doing, I would just reset the final linear transformation in my model. And the last iteration of the code implements some combination of these to the effect that at least I stopped observing this entropy collapse completely in my experiments. Okay, this third obstacle that I have encountered, and I completely don't understand where it comes from, is forgetting. So, okay, remember that we're supposed to be doing this curriculum learning. So first I try to train the model to solve only this very, very easy case of length two inputs. And then only once it understands how to do parity of 2 bits, I give him some examples with 3 bits and so on. And before moving to 4 bits, I wait until the model understands these 3 bits. But what will happen is that, so what I would like to happen for what I would like what I would like to happen. Well, I would like that the model understands 2 bits, then it understands 3 bits, 4 bits, but when it understands 4 bits, it still understands how to do 2 bits. But this is not what happens in the experiments. The model, I have a model which has like perfect accuracy up to some length. Suddenly I increase the maximal length by 1, and the model is trying to learn it, but it's not learning it. And even more, it starts to forget how to do the easier examples. And suddenly you have a model that does everything badly. So, okay, I said that I completely don't understand why is that. I guess I could try to come up with some explanation that is connected to the fact that that the models still haven't grokked exactly like some universal solution, but we have only this memorization of what to do up to some length. But maybe there is something more complicated happening here. But there are easy fixes for that. And okay, so we have a model that was doing good up to some length. It's perhaps not our current model, like after the last update of weights, but it's some model that we have encountered during our training. So what we have to tell to the current one is just, okay, on these inputs, just do the same thing as the old guy. And more concretely, we do it by adding to our total learning loss some kind of cross entropy loss between the logics of some saved model called the teacher and the current model, which we can call the learner. In particular, here in our case, for each input length, for which I already had good accuracy, I had a saved teacher. For each length, a different one actually, but maybe it doesn't matter. And then I generate this cross entropy length, and then I somehow aggregate the cross entropy lengths from the different inputs by taking a soft version of minimum of these. Initially, I tried to take an average cross entropy from all the inputs, but this somehow didn't work very well because at certain length, I just, the cross entropy from the last length was so small that it stopped doing what it should be doing. And this soft minimum somehow works a little bit better, but still not perfectly. We could do something alternative, and I try to do that. So let's for a moment forget that we don't know what the theoretical solution is. So we can observe that we have this. So we talked already that we have this recursive procedure that. So for instance, if I have a short input, three letters, then what the model does on this short input, it's the same as what the model should do on a longer input on these first three letters. So we could use that for teacher-learner laws. It would be against our initial goal, so let the model think on its own. And also, as it turns out, it doesn't work that well. I mean, which is surprising. And again, I don't fully understand why, because this is some kind of step-by-step teaching, but not like the other authors did, but now with reinforcement learning. Okay, I was talking for what? For more than 40 minutes. I will show you some pictures. So this is a plot of accuracies over time. They are smooth because the variance of these accuracies is pretty crazy. And we have different input lengths. Here, up to 11. Why up to 11? Because this is how many times I managed to advance to larger length in my training. So okay, maybe I didn't say that like the condition for advancing is that the total accuracy is more than 95%, and the accuracy on the current maximal length, on the words with current maximal length, is also more than 95%. If that happens, I say, okay, from now on, I will be generating also examples from n+1 length. And here you can actually see that some of these plots appear only at some point, which is corresponds to exactly this model, to this moment when the model was doing pretty well on easier examples. As you can see, there is some convergence happening here, but it's very far from perfect. And for me, this plot is like, it makes me pretty happy because this is really like one of the best things, the best result that I've managed to encounter while trying to do these experiments. Everything that I tried before was going much worse, including I couldn't, advance to length 6 or something like that. So there is another, I guess, picture for a different size of model with the same training. And as you can see here, so on the first picture, I had like 50,000 iterations. Here, I'm already around 70 something thousand of iterations. And it didn't get much better. And you can see that for each length, suddenly like this last length, the model gets blocked and cannot advance to larger lengths. And well, so somehow this means that the model hadn't grokked the universal solution that would generalize for other inputs. And probably it's still doing some kind of memorization, but memorization with chain of thought. That what exactly is doing, I haven't been able to understand so far. And okay, so there was supposed to be some picture here. Okay, let's look for the attention maps. They are kind of nonsensical. I mean, like not really anything happens here. If we had something happening like corresponding to this theoretical solution that we were talking about, here on the bottom of each pictures we have this end end of line row, and we would expect that somehow this line should have maximal attention on the first token. So we would expect, you know, a red square on the left lower corner of each of these pictures. Nothing like that is happening, neither in the first layer nor on the second layer. So what the model is discovering is it is indeed some kind of alien reasoning, but it's not because but I mean, not really, because I mean, like it still haven't progressed well enough that we could say that it have some kind of universal solution. And the question is, well, maybe if we run this longer with bigger batches and so on, it will be able to progress further. Or maybe it's still that reinforcement learning is somehow very bad for this. There is something that I haven't shown, but I was telling you that there could be this alternative approach where I get a teacher-learner consistency laws, but applied on also to reasoning steps. So somehow impose this reasoning, how the solution should look like. And then these plots look like that still. So maybe reinforcement learning is somehow very ineffective for this kind of things. And since I have still a few minutes, an obstacle for, I mean, it's not really an obstacle, but that's some kind of observation that I have made and that is consistent with what some other authors reported, which surprised me, but maybe it shouldn't. So it seems that smaller models generally behave better in these experiments. And they advance to larger, they advance in this curriculum learning faster. Something was reported by one of these other papers. I think there is a mistake here in this slide. It's not the Zai et al. Paper. It's a different paper. Sorry for that. And well, so the first explanation that comes to mind is, okay, maybe there's some overfitting, and probably there is, but that might be not the full explanation. Maybe some more subtle explanation would be that, well, a larger model indeed can memorize longer inputs, but memorize here, I mean, can mean different things, and in particular in this context, it would mean that the model learns to solve the task without chain of thought. Because when we say that that the task is hard for the transformer to do in one iteration, that means that there is no one transformer, you know, to rule them all for all inputs. But still, if we take a single transformer, then it might be pretty good for some amount of input lengths. And this, of course, happens in our case. And if you take a smaller model, then somehow it should hit the limits of its potential without chain of thought much faster, and then once it hits limit, it's forced to try to look for try to understand how to reason, to invent some kind of reasoning, somehow use this chain of thought. And if the model is forced to do that earlier, it's when it's forced to do that, it's still in the easier environment. So I guess that's might be some very crude explanation for what is happening, but I'm not sure if a correct one. So, okay, what are the learning outcomes? So for me, the personal learning outcomes is that I learn quite a bit about reinforcement learning and what can go wrong, what things work, and what are done. From a scientific point of view, this is very far from the end. And what are the next steps? Well, I still remain kind of optimistic, and I think that maybe if I wait a little bit longer or increase batch size, change some parameters, that the model will be able to grow and find some nice solution that works for a lot of inputs, for a lot of input sizes. And then if I manage to achieve that, it would be great to move to this point two that I mentioned on one of the earlier slides. So to do mechanistic interpretability on that and try to understand whether this solution somehow corresponds to what what we would expect the model to do, or maybe it's something rather different. And of course, this case, the second case would be very exciting. I hope that maybe in a few months I will have some more results to share about that. Okay, so that seems to be everything that I have prepared for today, and it's almost free. So if you have any questions, I can answer them here or in the breakout room. Thank you for listening.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
So do you have your slides still?
Sorry?
Yeah, slides are up.
Yeah.
Oh, I can't see them. Before when you said that the experiments work better on the smaller models,
Yeah.
do you mean that like smaller models get better performance in absolute terms, or that chain of thought RL makes more relative improvement?
In absolute terms, yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Let's maybe wrap up here. Oh, Carly, you have.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask another question. Just like, do you have any intuitions of like how much these takeaways apply for like chain of thought reinforcement learning in language models?
Yeah, that's a good question that I was hoping is not gonna be asked. I mean, I think that the case here is like very significantly different from what happens in large language models with when you do reinforcement learning to fine-tune them, especially since there the model already has some knowledge in it, and for if I would like to have an experiment that that is still on small transformers, but somehow better resembles this large language model case, this would be more like something I could train a model to do one task with chain of thought, and then try to fine-tune it for a different task without, again, maybe without telling him what's the correct reasoning, and then this would be, I guess, more similar. So whether there are like some very direct lessons for this case, I'm not sure. I think if there is something to understand here, it's on more general level of how the transformer can process information at all.